Hello, my name is Diana Piccolo. My presentation focuses on Dorothea Lange and her dedication to teach through compelling imagery as a visual sociologist during the Great Depression and World War II. Her iconic photograph, Migrant Mother, seen here, has become one of the most reproduced images in the world and stands as a defining symbol of the Great Depression. Understanding more about who Dorothea Lange was can help us appreciate what made her suited for the role she took on and how it shaped her vision. Janie Hubbard, an associate professor of curriculum and instruction at the University of Alabama, summarizes a book, Dorothea Eyes, written by Barb Rosenstock. Hubbard's summarization is important because it allows us to ascertain details about Lange's life that undoubtedly shaped her outlook. Hubbard states that Lange lived with a limp after polio, and she also carried the pain of her father's abandonment. As a woman photographer, she worked in a profession dominated by men. She endured biases and overcame barriers. So she was deeply aware of hardships and human struggles, making her sympathetic to those who were ignored at this point in history. This includes women, children, African Americans, former slaves, migrant workers, and Chinese Americans. Therefore, I include Lange here among the subjects she photographed because she was part of this landscape. I'd like to add a note about Lange's goal in photographing her subjects. She states that it was not to simply photograph them at their most vulnerable state, but it was to show them with dignity and grace. I think she does a nice job of that. During this time in history, magazines and films, they primarily focused on the wealthy and the famous, giving little attention to the impoverished. When they did, they mainly focused on the unemployed men who were out of work due to the Depression. Lange turned her lens on America's sharecroppers, migrant tenants, and people of color, groups largely invisible to the wider public. She is working for the federal government under the FSA, or Federal Security Administration, as part of Roosevelt's New Deal. The purpose of the New Deal was to provide low-interest loans and relief to sharecroppers, migrants, and black families. So, working for the FSA, Lange systematically documented the lives of these individuals, focusing her camera on their struggles due to social and economic injustices, including the treatment of Japanese Americans during World War II when she worked for the WRA, the War Relocation Authority. Chapter 9 of Through Women's Eyes, Change and Continuity, Women in Prosperity, Depression, and War, 1920 through 1945, briefly touches on the broader scope of Lange's work. But I am going to do a more in-depth examination of her images because they stand as powerful testimony to the conditions of societies overlooked, especially women, revealing the poverty, exploitation, and neglect. When Dorothea Lange photographed White Angel Breadline in 1933, this was one of her earlier photographs. The emphasis was overwhelmingly on unemployed men. The Great Depression's imagery and public discussion at the time often portrayed unemployment as a male crisis, as men were expected to be the primary breadwinners. The idealized notion of family was that the woman stayed home and took care of domestic responsibilities. However, women made up approximately 25% of the workforce and experienced job loss and hardship. Women worked because they needed the money. So to be ignored in such a manner left them without the means to provide for their family or assist in doing so. By examining a quote from author Meridale Lasore, she was a right-wing writer with an outspoken view of the time, around 1932, when she wrote this article entitled Women on the Breadline, and it's included in Chapter 9 of Through Women's Eyes. The article gives a first-hand account of a woman's experience seeking work at what could be described as an unemployment office. Listen as I read an excerpt from that. It says, I am sitting in the city's free employment bureau. It's the women's section. We have been sitting here now for 4 hours. We sit here every day waiting for a job. There are no jobs. Most of us have had no breakfast. Some have had scant rations for over a year. Hunger makes a human being lapse into a state of lethargy, especially city hunger. Is there any place else in the world where a human being is supposed to go hungry amidst plenty without an outcry, without protest, where only the boldest steal or kill for bread and the timid crawl the streets? Hunger like the beak of a terrible bird at the vitals. Women who were already barely scraping by because of the type of work they did was undervalued and considered a supplement to their husband's earnings. Therefore, they received low wages, and if they were widows or deserted wives or single, they would have had an extremely difficult time. On the other hand, you had migrant workers like Thompson, made famous by the migrant mother photo. There's a photo of her there with her children and an empty dish in front of her. Lange described Thompson as being stranded in a pea picker camp where there were no work and almost no food. Migrant workers sought assistance through seasonal farm labor, relief camps, or federal aid through programs such as the Farm Security Administration, the FSA. But if you were female, you were most likely denied relief. You could say that these women were doubly marginalized as victims of the economic crisis and of gender bias, since New Deal policies and social sympathy largely prioritize unemployed men. So Lange's photo did a lot to bring the plight of women to the fore, so that people could see the way in which women were treated. Novelist Ray Meadows provides a primary source signed by Lange entitled General Caption Number 19. It describes the situation of a husband, wife, and child from Person County, North Carolina, dated July 1939. Lange photographed the family's simple house in the hardened, barren soil. But what's interesting and innovative for the times was the notes, as seen here, from her observations that she includes with each of her photo sessions. In this document, Lange notates the erosion of the land. She points out that this family's crop production is smaller in comparison to some of the other tobacco farms. She references the sound of the hoe striking the rocks in the soil. I'd like to read a part of Lange's description of the cooking area. She writes, chimney, lean-to with kitchen stove pipe, stuffed through side of wall and capped off with joint of tobacco flue to keep smoke from blowing back into house. End of quote. This indicates this family's extreme poverty and the way they improvised by piecing together whatever scraps they had to make their home functional. In this case, not having proper ventilation, they used a tobacco flue, which is farm equipment used to cure tobacco. Lange further adds, there was no privy in sight. or outhouse as was common in those days, and that the man was gone 20 minutes to fetch a bucket of water from the spring. But notice the comment of the wife. She states, "They treat us better here than where we used to be." Very sad. On Sunday, December 7th, 1941, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, and killed over 2,500 Americans. I use the Encyclopedia Britannica for source material. It relates that 73 days after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the government responded by retaliating against those of Japanese ancestry living in the United States. President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066 to authorize the military to construct and run 10 internment camps that imprisoned over 120,000 Japanese Americans living on the West Coast in California, Oregon, and Washington. 2/3 of these individuals sent to the camps were U.S. citizens. In today's light, their treatment would be considered wrong, even unconstitutional. Looking at the picture we see in the upper left, we see those tags worn around the necks of the family, which was a requirement for all detainees. Next, we see the newspaper headline, celebrating the imminent ouster of all Japs in California. Underneath, we have the barracks, which housed the families. But these locations were in remote areas. As you can imagine, there was not much to do for stimulation or activity, and this went on for 3 years. In the lower left, one of the detainees residing in the camp has a son in the United States Army fighting for the U.S., while his family is enduring this kind of treatment that we've discussed here. So it's not difficult to see the paradox. Lange's goal was to humanize and publicize the harsh realities of so many Americans who were ignored. Today, her photos are used as learning and teaching aids in schools by historians and sociologists to teach about the Depression, injustices, and civil rights violations. If you'd like to learn more, Lange's photos are in the public domain as part of the National Archives of Library or the Library of Congress catalog. Thank you for watching.